So yeah, welcome to the event, which is actually sort of branded triply under sort of three flags. The first is under the Project on Deliberative Governance and Law, which is based both here at the ANU College of Law and at McGill University Law School, and Dom and I are both associated with that. Secondly, this is an electoral regulation research network event, so that's a network which Dom has developed and Michael. So it's a research network with branches in more or less every state and territory, I think. And finally, their European Studies Center here at the ANU. So our speaker is Dr. Stephen Elstub of Newcastle University in the UK. And he's here in Canberra visiting the UC Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance Center, which is where sort of John Dryzek and other deliberative Democrats are based. His work focuses on UK politics, which is kind of interesting these days, and particularly on public opinion, civil society participation, and deliberative democracy. So today's talk by Stephen is entitled A Comparative Analysis of the Deliberative Quality of Televised Election Debates in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Delighted to be here, so thank you for having me. Thank you very much to Ron for organising and inviting me. So as Ron says, today I'm going to outline a project which compares deliberative quality of televised debates in the UK, Belgium, Netherlands and Germany. We're at the very early stages of the project, so we don't have any results for Germany as yet, so we'll be focusing on the other three countries. In fact, coding isn't complete for any country as yet, so the results I'm going to present today are very preliminary. The analysis is very preliminary, but I hope, despite that, you still find some interest in it. But given that it is a project at sort of relatively early stages, we'd particularly welcome any thoughts about the project design. And I say we because I should acknowledge my co-author, Sophie Marianne from the University of Amsterdam. So, why televised debates? Well, they're becoming increasingly popular in election campaigns the world over. But the quality of debate within them is roundly divided. When they were first introduced in the UK in 2010, several commentators criticised them. Friedland said they aimed not at the logical but the emotional part of the voter's brain. Marquise said they analysed performances, not policies or their absence, and Hastings that they marked a further step in our march towards X-factor governance. In the US, they're particularly noted for their levels of incivility. Ben Carson, one of the Republican candidates in recent times, asking someone to attack him, and the performance and behaviour of Trump and lack of respect that he showed his other debaters has been very notorious and roundly critiqued. However, I think it's more complicated than that. I think there's more nuance. There is perhaps a contribution that they can make. For example, you have these televised debates as well in Australian election campaigns, and commenting on some of the recent debates and for the recent elections, Tingle in the Australian Financial Review said, "What a relief to hear two leaders having a civilised and detailed discussion about policy issues, not engaging in slogans and simply attacking each other." So we think it merits further inquiry what the quality of discussion is within these televised debates. However, most studies on televised debates focus on the extent that they influence voting behaviour. Those that do look at the internal dynamics of communication don't really do this through a deliberative lens, and it's mainly single case studies as well. So we want to look at the deliberative quality and do a comparative approach as well. But why take this deliberative lens? Why look at it through deliberation? I mean, some could say it isn't deliberation straight out, because usually in deliberative democracy it's about making a decision, and these leaders aren't making a decision here. However, a decision is still being made. It's being made by the voters. And I think this brings in the responsible party model theory, which takes a normative look on policy representation, says that policy should be responsive to what citizens want, that parties should therefore offer clear policy proposals, and this can aid effective electoral choices and enhance accountability. Therefore, deliberation in election campaigns could facilitate this. Diana Mutz's work on political communication, and particularly looking at aspects of trust and engagement, she says that incivility does have anti-deliberative effects in the sense that incivility on television it leads to a decline in respect for different viewpoints, but it makes things more entertaining and it increases engagement, not just in the numbers of people who want to watch these shows, but it leads them to discuss them more as well. And we can also take a deliberative systems approach. So those of you not familiar with this, this is the idea that in order to scale up deliberation, we need a diversity array of sites to do this with a division of labour. So we can't expect each part, each location to have all the norms of deliberative democracy in one place at one time. We need to combine them in order to achieve a deliberative system. So that begs the question, you know, can televised debates contribute here, even if they're not entirely deliberative? So moving on to how we are approaching this, as I said, it's a comparative approach, and our case selection is based upon most similar system design. They're all established European democracies. They're different but comparable as a result, we think. We've also got the televised debates are over a 6-year span, so quite a narrow time period, which I think helps for comparative analysis as well. So in the project overall, we've got UK 2010-2015 debates, Germany 2009-2013, Netherlands 2010-2012, and Belgium 2010-2014. However, I'm going to go on and provide some preliminary results, and it's only for those debates marked in bold. So UK 2010, Netherlands 2010, and Belgium also 2010. They do, though, have different electoral systems, which we think could lead to differences in the deliberative quality within the debates themselves. So we've got majoritarian system in the UK, proportional systems in the Netherlands and Belgium, and a hybrid mixed member approach in Germany. The media systems could also have an influence, but actually the media systems are very, very similar. Indeed, if we take Helena Mancini's classic typology of media systems, then Germany, Netherlands and Belgium are all democratic corporatist. This would mean then that they have high levels of political parallelism and high levels of professionalisation, which should make them moderately deliberative. The UK, Helena Mancini classify as liberal, which then means low levels of political parallelism but still high levels of professionalisation. So that's the ideal and makes it highly deliberative. However, Helena Mancini do acknowledge that actually in their classification the UK doesn't fit that nicely in the liberal model because of the BBC. It's not completely a market orientated model. And other commentators have suggested that actually the political divisions in the UK are quite accurately reflected in the media. So that again, both those factors would drag it more towards the democratic corporatist model. So we don't think the media systems are really that significantly different. Moving on to look at how we analyse the deliberative quality of the debates, and we take the Discourse Quality Index. So this is a form of content analysis that sort of follows Habermasian discourse ethics. It was originally designed and applied to Parliament, but it's acknowledged, I think, that it can be used in different contexts. That's one of the things that we're exploring, if it's a good method to research televised debates as well. So you have these then norms of deliberation, which I say this is a particularly Habermasian take on deliberation. So we should have equal participation, we should have, people should participate with sincerity, they should justify with reasons the claims that they make and demands that they make, that these should be oriented towards the common good, that there should be reciprocal respect, and that we should listen to the arguments of others and change our mind accordingly if we think they put forward some good arguments. So the first thing to note is you can see why perhaps the deliberative systems approach has emerged. What a demanding set of criteria to meet in practice to have all of those things occurring at all times. But this then forms the basis of the Discourse Quality Index. So you start to code when there's a speech act. A speech act is where someone makes a demand. The other thing I should note is that we can't, one element of Habermas's theory that we can't code for there is sincerity, truthfulness. So that isn't coded for, but the DQI tries to code for all these other criteria. And to give you an example, so if we take justification of demands first, there's 4 codes here. So there's no justification, that's quite unproblematic. Someone makes a demand, they give no reason why we should do that. There's an inferior justification where they do provide a reason, but it's not really linked to the demand that they've made. There's a qualified justification where there is a reason provided and it's clearly linked to the demand that's made. And a sophisticated justification where there'd be more than one reason given with a concrete link to the demand made. So that's as by way of, oh yeah, and so they're on a scale then from non-deliberative to very deliberative. No justification, not deliberative. Sophisticated justification, much more deliberative. And then this is the coding framework of the DQI overall. It might be hard for you all to see it. I'm not going to go through it in great detail. It's really just to give you, I've tried to give you a flavour of how the coding system works with the example of level of justification. But you can see there all the, apart from sincerity, all the elements that we've just been through are coded for, whether they can participate, whether they do justify their claims, whether those claims are orientated towards the common good, the distinction made there between utilitarian justifications and Rawlsian justifications, whether there's respect to societal groups, respect to the demands of the people you're debating with, whether you respect the counter-arguments with the people you're debating with, and whether people are willing to change their position, constructive politics, and find common ground. So, what do we expect to find across, given that we haven't got anything for Germany here, let's focus on the UK, Belgium and Netherlands. What do we expect to find here? So, differences, we expect to find differences in terms of respect. We expect high levels of respect in proportional systems, Belgium and the Netherlands. There should be, according to the research of Van der Berg and Walter, there should be less negative campaigning in proportional systems, and therefore high levels of respect where you need to form broad coalitions in order to govern. If you can govern it on your own, such as majoritarian systems in the UK, then you'd likely see less levels of respect. We found constructive politics to be unpredictable about whether we'd find similarities or differences there. On the one hand, research of McDougall on televised debates suggests that viewers dislike if the leaders are ambivalent, and also election campaigns is when parties are trying to really highlight their differences. At the same time, in proportional systems where you need coalition governments, more constructive consensual politics is the norm, and Steiner and co study from looking at a number of different parliaments around the world suggested you do get more constructive politics in consensual systems. So we thought that one could go either way. But we thought in terms of counter-arguments, results should be very similar across the 3 cases. what we expect to see here is really a lack of engagement. This is based upon Platosics, issue ownership theory, where different parties are associated with different issues and will try and claim that ground, and also Benoit's functional theory of political campaign discourse. He theorises that there'll be three types of discourse that we'll find in political campaigns: acclaims, attacks and defences. Acclaims, he says, will happen the most. There's no cost to saying, look, this is how great we are. So attacks will happen less than acclaims, because these can be perceived as negative by the voters if you're always attacking your opposition and competitors. And then defence will happen the least of all. This is because this will draw attention to your weaknesses. If you defend against an attack that you've received, you're normally going to be attacked on an area that you might well be weak on. So if you can use your time in the televised debates to defend yourself and talk about it, you're drawing attention to that. And Benoit has sort of empirically verified this theory in televised debates specifically, but in campaign discourse more generally. What it suggests is that there'll be a lack of engagement. They're not really going to engage with each other's arguments, and we don't see any reason why there should be any difference in the different countries. We also think in terms of justifications, we have the same expectations. We couldn't think of any reason why there may be a difference. It depends on how much weight you put on the media systems classification. If you put a lot of weight on that, then you might expect to see high level of justifications in the UK system, because it's got a more deliberative media environment. But as we said earlier, we don't see there being a massive distinction there. So what we're trying to do here is investigate differences, but also to see if we can generalise the findings. So this comparative study is building up on a study that I've done where we compared the UK televised election debates from 2010 with the deliberate quality of debates in Westminster. For those of you interested, it should be coming out in British Politics next year. And as you can see here, this column is the most illustrative because it shows who's coming out on top of the criteria. Then it's Westminster all the way down. Respective groups, the leaders come out on top, but it's not statistically significant. But there is one other area then where the leaders' debates do seem to be superior, and that is on level of justification, and this difference is statistically significant. So what we want to see, whether this was something that is general to the televised debate format or whether it was an idiosyncratic result, hence moving to a more comparative approach. So moving on to the results, constructive politics, remember here we were unsure what to expect, and we do see this, I don't think that's all, but the small green box for the Netherlands, that's showing a tiny presence of some mediating proposals occurring in the televised debates. But look at those big, tall purple bars, it's pretty much all positional politics. So we said that, and that's even the case in the proportional system, so even though you might get more constructive politics in other parts of proportional systems, it still shows that in the actual campaigns itself, certainly in the televised debates, parties are trying to put clear blue water between them and highlight their differences. Then moving on to respect, remember here we expected there to be differences. We expected more respect in the proportional systems of the Netherlands and Belgium. So firstly, respect to demands, that's the top graph there. Actually what we find then is very almost identical results there for Belgium and the UK. So Belgium's the middle and the UK's the bottom bar there. Whereas we would expect Belgium to be much closer to the Netherlands. If we move to counter-arguments, that's the second graph there. There are some differences here, but I don't think there's any particular trends that you can pick out. I think the clear lesson from this is kind of what we expected, that they are rather disrespectful of each other. They're just not engaging with each other. They're just making their own arguments, but they're not responding to the arguments that others are made. And then at the bottom there we've got respect for other social groups. This is again an area where we perhaps wouldn't necessarily expect to see any difference. You know, in an election campaign, parties are going to try and reach out to a range of different voters, a range of different societal groups. And again, we see there are some differences, but we see quite similar results there. And largely it's neutral, actually. No one's making a particular play or a particular case to appeal to any specific electoral group. Moving on to justifications, remember here then we expected similarities across the cases. And we do see the UK and Belgium are the first two on the top graph there, and we see very similar results there between the UK and Belgium, and strong high levels of justification for the demands that are being made. Where in the Netherlands, where respect was higher, if you recall, we see less justification. Moving to the bottom graph, in the Netherlands, there was much more focus on the common good. Perhaps we expected to see higher levels of this. Research by Lewis Block and Stegmaier suggests that voters actually do focus more on common good than their own self-interest. So you'd think that would be higher. And we're having difficulty trying to explain why there's such big national differences here in the content of justification. So, to conclude, we think that the Discourse Quality Index is useful for other environments other than parliamentary debates. It is useful for studying deliberative quality of televised election debates. We think it's a fruitful avenue to integrate political communication, electoral campaigns and the deliberative democracy literature. But ultimately, the evaluation depends on the yardstick. It depends on which deliberative criteria you think are important as to judge whether you think they're making an important contribution and which debates in which countries are going to make the more important contribution. However, our preliminary results do suggest, I think, some important findings. They are only preliminary, but the debate format seems to cut across some of the features of the electoral system differences that we would expect to see. You know, we saw quite a high level of similarity between the UK and Belgium, where you would expect Belgium and the Netherlands to be much closer. We also see that it's perhaps quite difficult to combine high levels of respect with high levels of justification, reason justification. And this actually conforms to findings from other deliberative forums. Research into mini publics tends to show that you get a lot of respect but not a lot of justification. Research into Parliament says you get a lot of justification, not a lot of respect. So that seems to confirm that perhaps it's hard to get both of those. And overall, you know, televised debates are highly criticised, but it's not as bad as it seems. Okay, there are some problems with respect here, but overall it's perhaps okay. We think voters can learn a lot from the reason justifications that are given in televised debates. But we would hasten to add, we don't see this as a deliberative debate per se. You know, they're not engaging with each other and engaging with each other's arguments, which is a requirement of deliberation. But nonetheless, I think we think it does suggest televised debates can make a contribution to a deliberative system. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. Do we have any questions from the audience?
It's not so much a question as thinking out loud. You've picked on electoral systems there, but I'm struck by the potential for variation between different proportional systems, and particularly loose proportional systems that have a high threshold and therefore might motivate towards a two-party system or a relatively small number of parties, which then might lessen the incentive to be nice to other people because you might need them after the election, as it were. More generally, there may well be proportional systems where the sides are well defined in terms of potential coalitions afterwards, rather than this sort of atomistic thing where everyone's a potential coalition partner after the election. So have you looked at things from that perspective? And also looking at the role of individual candidates. There's a piece that was done 20 years ago by Carey and Shugo, I think, on incentives to cultivate a personal vote.
So with candidates, whether it's just down to the actual personalities of the people that are involved, two really important points. I mean, absolutely, yeah, I was a bit crude in kind of just lumping Belgium and Netherlands together as well. They're proportional, so we'd expect the same. And I think we do need to add more nuance, drill down into the literature on the differences between their electoral systems to see if that can help us explain some of the differences that we're seeing between Belgium and the Netherlands on that. I haven't got a lot to say on that right now, but you're absolutely right, it's something we need to do. But I still think you would expect, given that they've both got party list systems, and I'm not sure about what thresholds, etc., they operate in each of them, but you would still expect them to be more similar than the UK, which has, a first past the post system, I think, if the electoral system is important in determining what might happen in televised debates. So it might be that it doesn't make that much difference.
Could I just come back on that though, because part of that may tie in with people's perceptions of what they're going to need by way of partners after the election. Now, coming into the last UK election, there was actually this anticipation that there was a prospect of coalition formation and minority government again. And we've seen the same thing in Australia, although we've got majoritarian systems, that we've had a minority government in every state and territory and federally in the last 20, 25 years. So they're much more in people's minds now that election debates may not be the time for making new enemies. The other question I had is here in Australia, the big fight is who gets into the debates. And I'm wondering how they handle that in these proportional cases. Is it traditional government and opposition, or do all of the parties with, a prayer of success get into the process?
Just on going back to your first point, absolutely. I think the electoral context is important here, and we need to add a lot more sort of detail and context to when we start to write this up. For example, in the UK, which I know I'm on much more from concrete territory there, in the 2015 election, like you say, there was this prospect of a hung parliament, which had happened in 2010 anyway. But it was that's what everyone was predicting. So it would be interesting to see whether, with the leaders going into debates with that on their mind, whether we see more respectful dialogue than we did in the 2010, which, although resulted in a hung parliament, perhaps less people saw that coming. Then your last point was about, who gets in. I think that's really important, and there was a massive hurrah about that in the 2015 UK debate. So in 2010 it was just three protagonists: Blair for Labour, Clegg for the Lib Dems and Cameron for the Conservatives. And this time around it got opened up, and a lot more parties got included, but that meant there was one debate which had Cameron and Clegg and all the others, and then like an oppositional debate where Cameron and Clegg as the members of the government weren't allowed, or Cameron opted out, which basically meant Clegg had to as well, and then it was just the opposition leaders. In the Netherlands and Belgium, the history is to be much more inclusive, so they tend to have like 6 to 8 party leaders, so probably not every single party, but the more sort of credible ones, the ones with the largest support. But you also then made a comment about personalities, which I'll just, if I can show you some.
Do you want to go back to the story?
I want to go all the way down to the... So this slide here is quite hard to show, but this is again something that we would like to look into. But these are the individual performances. Yeah, can you? These are the individual performances just from the 2010 UK debates of Blair, Brown and Clegg.
Brown, Cameron and Clegg.
Yeah, Brown, Cameron and Clegg. What did I...
Sorry.
Is that the one?
Is this it?
Yeah, there should be two there, but that's okay. But basically, so this is just actually, so this is all the deliberative criteria aggregated together. And what you see is, so Clegg is yellow, Cameron is green, and Brown is blue. And you see that Clegg is, well, Brown and Clegg start off similar. Clegg sort of steadies and improves. Brown declines absolutely massively over the debates, as does Cameron. We think this is interesting because following these televised debates, there was a massive boost in the poll ratings for Lib Dems and Nick Clegg as an individual as well. So is there a relationship here? Obviously it could be for so many different reasons rather than the fact that his performance is more deliberative. We're not trying to make a causal connection here, we just think it is interesting. And then this one plots again across the three debates just on level of justification. You see Clegg justified more, Brown improves in the second one but drops off again in the third, and Cameron sort of like fairly average all the way through. But yeah, so we think that's interesting. I do think personalities, the individuals, absolutely are important. I think by having a larger sample, looking cross country, we can sort of get over some of those things as well. But it's something we are interested in looking at.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask about the timing of it because, I mean, during the primary elections the debates between Hillary and Bernie, clearly they were much more respectful of each other early on when Bernie didn't have a chance. And as time progressed, they got a little less respectful, at least, especially Bernie, because, I mean, Hillary had more to lose. So, I mean, you may want to look not only at the timing of them, but also at the strength of the respective candidates in the polls themselves, because it affects how much they view their ability to act as a statesperson. I mean, Hillary always thought, I better not beat up on Bernie too much, I need his voters. And Bernie had no choice but to try to beat up on her eventually.
Yeah.
So, but none of these countries have primary elections, they all have party, little pre-selection type things.
No. So this is the actual election itself, so it's leaders of the party going head to head in televised debates.
But any of the parties have their own primary elections ahead of time? Any of these particular?
Surely not.
nations?
No, they don't. Yeah,
So
it's
there's
not
a tiny little
parliamentary
group of
systems.
party people get together and decide.
Who decides? I mean, each party, of course, will have their own different rules of how they select leaders, and I certainly don't know all of them. But yeah, it's they don't have primaries as in the American system, so it's parliamentary democracy. So the party itself decides how to govern itself, and then the electorate vote parties into seats.
But party members, not normally a very large number, I suppose.
Party membership,
Yes.
yeah, very small and on the decline in all our samples. But you are right. I think that's an absolutely good point. And it kind of relates to the first question. Context here is really important. I think that you're right. We need to do a much better job of detailing that.
Thank you, Stephen. I found that really interesting because I like to look at applications of deliberative quality indexes and how they can be applied to these sort of things. So it's fantastic the work that you're doing. I've got a few more context things for you, and I think coming from an Australian perspective, one of the things that struck me is that another variable that you might want to, and it may not be relevant to the countries you're studying, but in Australia there isn't a tradition of debates. They sometimes happen and they sometimes don't. We don't have it's not a regular part of the election lead up. Like it's becoming more common, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the Australian electorate expects to have them or misses them when they don't happen. So I'm wondering if, but in the countries that you're studying, perhaps they are, regular events as part of the pre-election build-up. So in terms of the effect that has on the leaders and the parties, if they know it's a predictable part of the cycle, they're going to approach it in a different way than if it's a sort of one-off, or possibly we're going to have to deal with it this time or not. So I guess that's something else. It may not be relevant at all to your study, but if Australia was included in your sample, you'd have to deal with that particular peculiarity of the Australian political and electoral scene. The other one I was thinking about, in terms of the way in which you're discussing the media is, and I'm sure you've thought of it, so integrating social media and the impact that has on the extent to which the media system is more or less deliberative. Again, that was particularly relevant in the most recent Australian campaign because there was a debate about whether or not one of the debates should be in Australia on Facebook. So we're moving into this, have already stepped into this world where it's not just about the television. They may be televised debates, but there's a separate deliberative aspect potentially with the way in which social media engages with that. And so, again, you can always make a study more or less complicated, but that's something else to either bring in or caveat out, depending on what you're choosing to do. But and you probably know more about that than I do.
No, two really good points. I mean, in terms of tradition, you're right. I think that's variable across the countries. So the UK, this is 2015 election was only the second time they've done this. 2010 being the first, so it's very, very new. When we did this, the paper that's coming out in British Politics next year, that we were quite well aware of that. It got so much media attention, but is that just because it's new? Is that something that is sustainable if it becomes a mainstay of electoral campaigning? But in the Netherlands, they've been going since the 1970s. They've had them a long time. Germany, I think it started in the early 2000s, so it's about 15 years there. So a few elections anyway, and I'm not too sure about Belgium actually when they started. But you are right. I think certainly that can affect how the media treats them. It can affect how the public view them and engage with them, and it can affect how the leaders perform themselves. Because in the countries where it's been a long-term tradition, they should know what works and what doesn't a bit better in terms of pushing the right buttons with the electorate. So that is important. The social media aspect is, I think, really interesting here. I think it's outside of this study to do that, but there are lots of studies about social media response to these televised debates, and particularly sort of know about the UK context here. But in the 2010-2015 debates, huge amounts of social media activity around the debates, but also people. So that doesn't tell us whether it created quality discussion in social media, just that it created discussion. But some of the studies have looked into this, and they are at least engaging with the policy content. It's not. There is obviously a lot of discussion about what they look like, what's their hair doing, blah blah blah. You do get that, but you also get a lot of social media discussion that is engaging with the actual policy. We don't know. The studies don't show whether that's good engagement with the policy substance, but they are at least talking about policy, not just talking about how they sound, how they look, and those kind of things. And there's high levels of social media activity around the debate, so I think it's a really important element.
Can I just wanted to follow up on that quickly. I think it was in 2010 that I remember seeing a debate here in Australia where not only was it sort of followed closely on social media, but there was actually live tweeting along the bottom of the screen on most of the channels. And on top of that, they had the worm. Which, I mean, from a deliberative perspective, at the time struck me as very unfortunate. because you're reducing it all to not only pithy statements that are selected by the producers, but also just a sort of like thumbs up, thumbs down sort of response, which was a bit aggravating actually at the time, because it sort of could undermine the whole deliberative potential of the exercise. I thought.
No, I think in the way the media treatment of the UK is that we don't get the worm during the broadcast, and we don't get the Twitter feeds after, but then there's tons of analysis post the televised debate where all of that gets portrayed towards them. But yeah, I mean, it's just how the media treats elections, and they just focus on the race so much and forget about the actual policy content. It's a shame.
Thanks. Kate, and then
I sort of had a follow-up question from that. I was wondering if one of the variables you are looking at or have considered is journalistic techniques and journalistic style, and in particular, the television debates I've watched, the host can range from a very interventionist host that actually, puts to the politician, like, no, you didn't answer his question, you have to answer it, to a very passive host that really, sees their job as keeping the peace. So I just think it'd be interesting for this study if it would have lessons for, journalistic style or techniques. I mean, is there capacity for a host in particular, or like Ron said, the way that, the whole event is televised and marketed to make these types of debates more or less deliberative, or is it just a neutral factor?
No, I think again that's another important part of the context. I guess that was lacking today. But I think it is an important factor. I mean, there's big literature on facilitation in deliberation in general, not specifically this type of debate format, but more generally, and that shows that facilitation and how debates are facilitated is crucial in determining the deliberative quality. So I absolutely think, like you said, that the hosts, for want of a better word, will have an effect. How great that effect is, I'm not so sure. I mean, I'm just trying to, in the UK ones, for example, the ones that were held on Sky, the host of that, he was certainly more interventionist than in any of the other ones from that year or from the 2015. There wasn't one on Sky this time round. There was just BBC and ITV. So yeah, I think it would be an influence. It's just something that would be very, very hard to come up with the typology across all the different countries. But I do think it is an influence. Yeah.
Be particularly hard in the U.S., where Donald Trump and the moderator actually got into a debate between themselves.
I wanted to pick up on that point because I was thinking about something similar but from a slightly different angle. I think it's actually quite an important variable, because when I think about what we call debates here in Australia, it really covers a wider field than the traditional concept of a structured debate, and particularly when they have these events that are at some club and there are members of the public who are allegedly swinging voters, and they're asking questions all the time of the participants. It's really more of a public meeting in the old sense than a debate. And I suspect it very much could affect the style of the formal participants in the process, in that most politicians will be perfectly, in Australia anyway, perfectly happy to call each other fools. They're a bit less inclined to call a panel of journalists fools, and they're less inclined again to call ordinary voters fools. And I see different methods of response and tones coming forward as depending on where the questioning and the interaction is coming from these different sort of structures and audiences. So I think that's certainly in this country it'd be worth looking at. The days, it used to be the case here in the old days where if you were a political leader and someone interjected, you'd make a smart comment and score off them and everyone would laugh because that was an element of the entertainment. These days it's much more like Gordon Brown, where you call someone a bigot, get caught on a microphone, and even if they're objectively a bigot, you've got to apologise and all that sort of thing.
It's funny, like Nigel Farage actually did call the audience fools at in the 2015 debate, the one on the BBC. because he said something against immigrants and everyone booed, and then he just said blame the BBC for skewing the audience. But actually they were. I don't know if it's quite a random sample, but it's they take a diverse group. So the way the format works here, they take a diverse audience, and the questions come from the audience, but there's obviously a filter there. The broadcaster and the producers are choosing which questions are going to be selected. So I'm not saying it's not ultimately driven by the media, but the questions come from the audience. Each audience member can propose a question and then they select them.
Do you see much difference, I mean, since we're talking about deliberation and explanation, are the candidates generally given enough time? Because, I mean, when we give them 2 minutes to respond, and all of a sudden then the moderator jumps in and says, your time is up, and they're trying to respond to somebody else's allegations earlier, and then they're trying to answer the question, there's no time but for just slogans. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that? And, I mean, are these folks in these debates given more time than a few minutes to respond, or?
So the usual form, they're not given more than a few minutes. But they might get given for each question a few minutes, several few minutes to respond, rather than it all being one. To try and avoid it just becoming a monologue, I guess, and to try and get some dialogue between them. But yeah, as you said, that doesn't tend to happen. They tend to have an opening statement, then it moves to questions from the audience. So that, a question will be asked, and they each will have a few minutes to respond to that question, and then there's a bit more toing and throwing around that question. And then that does come back, to one of the first questions, the personalities of the leaders, who's a bit more skilled at being able to get in, who can resist when the moderator, and answer the question, when the moderator, how strong is the moderator at saying, no, you've had your time, it's so-and-so's turn to speak. And the personality of the person, whether they can resist the moderator, make sure they get a bit more camera time to make it. So we haven't timed how long each person has to speak, and I guess we could do that. But we did code, if you remember, one of the first coding criteria was participation, how much people are interrupted. And interruptions are actually quite low. So they do tend to get their opportunity to have their say a bit.
May I ask you one quick question? And I know this is not what you were aiming at your research, but I think you indicated people have done this work. How much impact does a more deliberative debate have on voter preferences than a less deliberative debate? Does it matter to the average voter whether or not there's considered reasons for a particular point of view, or they just want a particular strike?
No, actually, that is an under-researched area, so like we don't know that. So I showed you those results of Clegg, Brown and Cameron, and that Nick Clegg came out much higher on the deliberative criteria and did much better in the poll ratings from those debates. But you can't draw a causal relationship there, absolutely no way. I'm not trying to, but I still found it interesting. So that's something that we don't know. In terms of the effect that televised debates have on voting, I mean, there's a huge literature on this. This is what people mainly researched. And ultimately, not much is the answer, because when you watch it, you're biased towards who you like, and you always think that they've done best. That tends to be how it goes. But research also suggests in very tight elections that the televised debates can make a difference, because obviously in very tight elections, a few swing voters can make all the difference. So they do make a difference there. But in terms of what aspects of the debate make a difference, I think we're still trying to understand that.
Because in the States, there have been little things that seem to sway elections, and as a result of debates. I mean, the Nixon-Kennedy debate, it was that Kennedy looked more statesman-like, and Nixon looked like he had shifting eyes and he was sweating. And and then of course, Ford got mixed up about Poland, and a few gaffes like that can really just
George
sink your ship.
The first George Bush checked his watch. That was a very bad guy.
Thanks. I was quite taken by your point that political debates aren't deliberative per se. I think we all recognise that. And so I'm interested in then what do you think is the potential for political debates to be deliberative, to play a more constructive role in supporting citizen deliberation particularly, and what shapes those expectations? And I notice you've done quite a lot of work on civil society. What role can civil society play in helping shape an expectation that debates should play a deliberative support to better deliberation?
Really good question, thank you. So, following the 2010 study, we kind of say that we think that they can make a contribution to a deliberative system because of this high level of justification. It seems to be, you know, other research has shown that in Parliament you get higher levels of justification than in most other types of bodies, and here we've compared with Parliament and the debates have come out higher than that. So it does suggest that it might be quite uniquely high levels of justification in this format. So that's what we kind of think it can make to a deliberative system. But like I said, we wanted to see whether that was just those debates that year, or whether it's something to do with the debate format, hence moving to the comparative research. And you know, preliminary results say we found some levels of that going on in Belgium, but not so much in the Netherlands. So we need to reflect on what those results mean a little bit further. In terms of expectations, I think that's really interesting. Now, I guess it comes back to the previous question. I don't know whether the voters want their leaders to be deliberative, and that's something they value or not. I just don't think that we know that. What we suggested that in the first paper is that if they were linked with like a mini public, a random sample of citizens that then were to have a discussion following the televised debates, then this could actually enhance the quality of the debate amongst the candidates even higher. You know, they know they're going to have to be speaking to a more informed electorate who are going to go on and discuss these issues themselves. You could sequence them in different ways. Questions could even come from the mini public and things like that. So we think that would be a way of increasing expectations. But in terms of across civil society and electorate more generally, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what role civil society organisations can do in terms of affecting debate quality in this format. I'm not so sure.
Well, I guess I could see a potential for something, a bit of an extension of the mini public idea, but you know, at the moment it's really just the journalists that are in the public domain expressing a view about how well that went, or whether people did justify things, or you know, how deliberative it was. Whereas you could imagine a scenario where, as well as the mini public debate discussion afterwards, you could also have some civil society groups operating in the sphere of accountability and transparency and those sorts of things, commenting on how good was this debate as a deliberative mechanism, how much of the time was spent on justification versus attack, and those sorts of things help people understand actually what was really going on here, and as well start to help people shape an expectation of what they actually, how they respond and how they respond.
No, I think that's a really interesting idea, actually. I like you say the sort of post-debate sort of format tends to be it's media experts and they're giving their comments, and then as we were saying before, you know, they look at the opinion worms and like social media entries, and then what the polls say, you know. But it's not maybe it's perhaps better to get a broader view of opinion. And I think in a mini public, you could really get a genuine chance, a more informed understanding of what a deliberative public might think about the debates.
I was just struck by one thing that in the earlier discussion was that we seem to work on the assumption that a debate can either be entertaining or informative, but it can't be both. And if you think back to previous generations, they were bristling with people who were capable of speaking in a way that was both entertaining and informative. And I just don't know whether that's been crushed out of our modern politicians from 25 or 30 years of campaigning based on 30-second ads or something.
Yeah, this is the problem also in the deliberative literature. There's a huge gap between, you know, whether emotional speech is actually deliberative because it's not, you know, pure deliberative speech is supposed to be rational, and that, you know, there's a long debate going on that I'm sort of trying to get my head around for some of the work that I'm doing, which I think Stephen's probably also trying to work out. You know, is saying that it's a pure appeal to emotions deliberatively useless, and I'm not, you know, I'm still making up my mind about that. You know, classically it probably is because it's not appealing to the mind, it's appealing to the heart, but we all know that politics doesn't work like that. So, yeah.
There's value in snap judgments.
Yeah.
Actually, but along those lines, just to follow on those two questions, the other thing that occurred to me is that you know, an election is not just about the issues; it's about sort of whether you trust and connect with the candidate. And so that I wonder if the DQI can actually accommodate that sort of basically gut level judgment.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try and address all that. Yeah, in terms of can you inform and entertain, I actually don't blame the politicians on this. I don't think it's the politicians that have changed. I honestly think it's the media context, and with mediatisation, you know, everything is sensationalised so much now that you have to be even more of a personality. You have to sensationalise even more yourself to kind of meet that media logic if you're going to get the airspace, if you're going to get the attention. So I think even the politicians that you were praising from the past would struggle in this sort of highly mediatised arena. But I do think rhetoric is important here. Very important. This is something that we picked up on and explored more in the first paper, and we're not doing so much in this comparative study. But some deliberative Democrats have sort of acknowledged that rhetoric does have deliberative benefits, and Chambers in particular, she talks about plebiscitary rhetoric. This is just what we would normally consider, you know, just emotional appeals. But she also talks about deliberative rhetoric, which is it's still rhetoric, but if it gets you to reflect upon your opinions and preferences, then it has deliberative virtue. And what we, following the discussion of the DQI results in the first paper, we then go on to do a rhetorical analysis. And what we say is, yeah, there's absolutely loads of rhetoric. It's not all just reason justifications going on in these leader debates. Please don't think we're making that claim. There's lots of rhetoric going on there as well. But what we argue is that because of the high levels of justifications interwoven with this rhetoric, we kind of get this deliberative rhetoric that Chambers says can have deliberative benefits. And that's the case we make. And interestingly, we argue that not only is Clegg the best deliberator, he's actually the best rhetorician as well. So.
It's a nice thought experiment to say, where would you put Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech?
Okay, I know, that's obviously, I would have to do a DQI of it, and then tell you. Sorry, and then there was also then the question of trust, which I think is absolutely related to all of this. Sophie, my co-author, would be so much better to answer this question, because this is what she does, is work on trust, and I know she's got future plans to look at the level, what watching the televised debates does towards trust, specifically, and whether the deliberative variance and deliberative quality affects the trust, levels of trust. But she hasn't done that yet, but she's planning on it, so I think it would be interesting to see.
Definitely. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thanks for a really, really fascinating and really sort of, I think, top-notch project. Thanks for sharing it with us.
And thanks for all the questions.